episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody who watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very, very much appreciated. I know I'm a bit behind with some of the comments, so I'll catch up with them as soon as I can. Had a lovely email from Paul at Brave New Spirits. It seemed that they enjoyed last week's episode of the show, so that's very cool. Always nice when that happens. Anyway, sticking with the independents, as you can see from today's title page, we're looking at a selection of releases from James Eadie, their spring releases. And when I was doing the title page, I realised that this is actually the third year in a row that I've done an episode on their spring releases, so seems to be a bit of a thing. It's always nice to see what they've been up to over the winter period, and what interesting casks and so on and so forth they come out with. So so the spring release, there was 2 releases in the small batch range, which obviously I am looking at, and there was 6 releases in the cask finishes range. No single cask bottlings this spring, so I've selected 4 of those 6, which I thought were quite interesting. And yeah, well, as you well know, any comments I make on today's episode of the show are wholly my own and have no bearing on the company that employs me, even though said company may well end up stocking some of these whiskies next month. You never know. But anyway, so not a great deal to say that I haven't already said several times over about James Eadie, so we're just going to crack on and take a look at today's lineup. Okay, so we're going to start with the two small batch bottlings. As you probably remember, a couple of years ago they started using the names of some of James Eadie's pubs for the small batch range, and come up with some quite interesting labels. So we're going to kick off with the Rose and Crown. So the Rose and Crown is a small Ben Nevis, an 8-year-old Ben Nevis. It's comprised of 3 casks, first fill bourbon hogsheads and refill sherry butts. Don't know, I assume looking at the colour, 2 and 1, I would imagine from that. Bottled at 46%, non-chill filtered, etc, etc. Bottling number 2 is the second release in the small batch range. This is called the Cross Keys, and is a 9-year-old Aultmore. It is 3 casks, first fill bourbon and refill barrels. I would imagine again 1 and probably 2, bottled at 46%. And we're going to move on to the cask finishes bottlings. The first one we'll be looking at is a Tamnavulin. This is a 10-year-old. It was distilled in October of 2013, obviously bottled earlier this year. 8 months finishing in first fill Malaga hogshead. Cask number 373073, and bottled at 56.6%. Butt is full. Bottling number 2. Bottling number 2. The second of the cask finishes bottlings, I should say, is a Blair Athol, a 12-year-old Blair Athol. This is distilled in December of 2011, bottled this year. Cask number 369682, 17 months refill Oloroso hogshead finish. Next bottling. Will you look at the colour of that? It's a sherried Aberlour. Yeah, do you think you're going to get a great deal of distillery character with that? Well, you never know. Stranger things have indeed happened. So this is a 12-year-old Aberlour. It is been distilled in September of 2012, bottled this year. Spent 22 months in first fill Oloroso butts finishing. So one assumes an American oak, probably a bourbon cask to start off with. Maybe some balance, or it may well just be like the Abunda. Anyway, so this is cask 367507, 59.3%. And the final bottling, unfortunately, isn't a Kalila, which is a bit of a shame. I always enjoy their sherried Kalilas. This is actually the oldest release in the spring releases. There's a 16-year-old Miltonduff. It was distilled in July of 2007, bottled this year. Cask number 369684, 17 months refill Oloroso hogshead finish. So bottled at 54.3. I was about to say 53.4, but no, it is 54.3. So interesting selection of whiskies. Let's kick off with a bit of Ben Nevis. Okay, so let's see what the Ben Nevis gives us. So 8-year-old Ben Nevis, first fill bourbon and sherry. Get quite a bit of the Oloroso sherry straight off the bat. Lots of dried fruits, but there's a lot of Speyside green fruit as well. Underripe gooseberry, green gage, green apple. Little bit of malt, touch of straw, touch of breadiness. Yeah, okay, that's quite nice and balanced actually. I mean, like I said, I mean it does kick off with quite a bit of the sherry, but that sherry doesn't seem to sort of like, you know, dominate the nose whatsoever. You know, it sort of announces its arrival and then kind of like just goes okay, and not a great deal of American oak, it has to be said. I don't get an awful lot of vanilla or anything like that, but I do get plenty of Speyside fruit, and I get a bit of bready sort of Ben Nevis character. So from my point of view, nicely balanced nose. Let's see what the palate's like. Now the palate is a complete reversal of the nose. The palate kicks off with more of the American oak, more vanilla, and then the sherry starts to develop on the mid palate and carry on through to the finish. Again, there's some light bready notes, a little bit of toastiness. Again, the Speyside green fruits are coming through, although I know it's a Highland, I know, but the green fruit kind of says Speyside to me. So quite chewy, quite malty on the finish, good length. I think from memory these are going to hit the shelves at about $49.95, something like that. So good value for money, I think. Nicely balanced. Yeah, good Ben Nevis. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Aultmore. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? There's a bit of an edge to it. Bit of grist, flour, lemon verbena, a little bit of perfume, and then it starts to develop this kind of almost biscuity note. And it feels almost like a Madeira finish, a very subtle Madeira finish, it has to be said. There's a little bit of gooseberry, there's a little bit of lime. Now, you know, the thing is, I suppose, when you purchase casks, you know, you buy a batch of casks, they're all ex-bourbon casks or ex-American oak or what have you. I don't suppose that there's legislation that says that that each of these casks has to come with a history of what it's been filled with. So, you know, you could buy an ex-bourbon cask, and someone may well have put Madeira in it and just, you know, not put that on the sort of the selling list or the bill of sale or whatever you want to call it. I mean, the amount of times I've sort of tasted sort of independent bottlings and said, I'm sure that's an ex-sherry cask of some form or description, and said independent says, well, just says American oak cask on the sales on the bill, you know. So it's possible that one of these casks may well have been had Madeira put into it at some stage, and because there is a real biscuitiness here, and that, I mean, I guess possibly that comes from the Aultmore. I would expect Aultmore generally tends to be sort of quite malty, quite honeyed, that kind of thing. I don't tend to get sort of biscuitiness from Aultmore, but it's a possibility, I suppose. So on the whole, again, you know, quite a well balanced nose, I think. So Let's see what the pal's like. Sweet, creamy vanilla. Bit more sweeter barley notes. There's almost honey, not quite honey. It's more kind of, yeah, it's more kind of cream. Maybe it's like a bit of cottage cream possibly than honeyed. Again, there's a gristiness on the mid palate. There's a little bit of an edginess to the barley. There's that biscuity note again. Some subtle spice. Nice kind of green fruit finish as the sort of like apple and lime comes in. Quite minerally, almost kind of austere, but actually pretty complex, I think. Really nice progression, and like I said, it's got this kind of biscuitiness. Maybe the biscuitiness is not quite so overt on the palate, but I still think that's yeah, not a bad bottle. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the cask finishes. So this is Tamnavulin first fill Malaga finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Okay, that's quite pleasant. It's quite floral, quite fragrant, quite honeyed, quite barleyed. Very subtle sherry. I mean, it's only 8 months in the sherry, and it's more of that kind of sultana, dried citrus, lighter dried fruit. We're not talking about the heavy oloroso-y sort of raisinated fruits. We're in the lighter end of the spectrum. A little bit of manuka honey, a little bit of sweet wood spice. There's a touch of almost kind of sort of resiny starchiness, I guess. It's a little bit of green fruit, so yes, I'm getting a touch of Tamnavulin kind of character. Mind you, Tamnavulin doesn't really have an inordinate amount of character anyway, does it? It's kind of, what's the polite way of describing Tamnavulin's character? Ooh, filler. Yeah. Okay, it can get quite nicely honeyed with time, so I guess this is actually quite a nice delicate sort of, you know, well finished, not too much sherry. 8 months is just about right. Kept, you know, a little bit of the semblance of the character of the spirit. Yeah, that to me is how to do a sherry finish. Let's see what that's like. Richer, more honeyed, a bit more sort of American oak initially, before the sort of like the dried fruits, again sultana, dried citrus kind of comes through. A little bit of a minerality, a little bit of bubblegummy white fruit on the finish, a little bit of green apple. Yeah, again, like the palate, or like the nose I should say, really quite nicely balanced. There's enough sherry there to interest the sherry heads, and there's distillery character as well. Although the distillery character isn't exactly overly complex, but there is distillery character there. So, you know, from a technical perspective, I think that this is actually a really good bottling. More space-ID fruits on the nose now. Quite floral again, sort of minerally, a little bit more honey. Yeah, absolutely pleasant. Nothing wrong with that nose whatsoever. Let's see what it passes on. It's actually quite nice and spicy on the aftertaste. It's a bit homogenous now. I mean, it's kind of shown up the sort of, you know, the lack of complexity really within the spirit. Yeah, it's kind of like sort of pleasantly barleyed. Again, there's the dried fruits. I think personally, I would drink that neat. I mean, it's only 56% after all. It's got more interest, more intensity. Without water, but you know, equally I think it's fine with water. and like I said, probably shows more the limitations of the distillery character rather than sort of anything else. But yeah, overall, I'm quite impressed with that. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so let's move on to the Blair Athol. So 12-year-old Blair Athol, 17 months refill Oloroso hogshead finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Again, another nicely balanced nose. A little bit more sherry character, but it's got quite a lot of oak. So I'm getting quite a lot of Bourbony oak. I'm getting baked apple fritter, pancake, biscuits, beeswax, leafy Oloroso. Okay, maybe not such a huge amount of Blair Athol character, but the Blair Athol richness is certainly noticeable. Plummy, dried plums, raisins. Yeah, I kind of quite like this. I mean, it is a lot of oak going on, but it's not one-dimensional oak. I'm certainly getting American oak, and I'm certainly getting sherry, and I'm getting the sort of Blair Athol-y kind of weight. It's certainly not quite as sort of towards the sort of distillery character as, say, the Tamnavulin was, but you know, I kind of quite like this, and I can see, obviously, you know, from a sticking one's commercial hat on, I can see customers that would actually enjoy this. You know, you obviously would need to sort of like a fair amount of oak character, but you know, it's not an outright oak monster. Let's see what pass right. Full, rich, juicy, chewy, malty, touch of barley, grips quite a bit on the finish, but that's a combination of alcohol and tannins, just sort of like, you know, masking that finish. Raisinated fruits, biscuits, malt biscuits, date, walnut, prune. Not so much American oak. There's a little bit of it kind of comes through on the finish, but obviously the finish being sort of rather masked by the alcohol and the tannins, you don't get a great deal of it. And again, not a huge amount of Blair Athol character. It's got the weight that I would associate with Blair Athol, but certainly I'm getting a lot more sherry character on the palate. Let's put a little drop of water with it, see what that does to it. Okay, we kind of pushed back the sherry a little bit. We've got more kind of baked fruit, citrus, there's more barley, there's more noticeable Blair Athol character now. Yeah, I like that with a little drop of water. I think that's just, it's an either or here. It's like you either like all that real intense oak, or you sort of put a little drop of water with it and just tame that oak a little bit, just push it down a little bit. Let's see what the pulse like now. Really juicy, very luscious. Still a little bit of an edge there, a little bit of a barley note, bit of an edgy barley note. You know, it's kind of soft but edgy. It's got sort of, you know, it's got a nice balance again. A little bit of black pepper creeping through in the finish. Not quite so honeyed maybe, not quite so overtly sherried, although again, you know, I'm not getting a great deal of distillery character bar the sort of like the influence of the weight of Blair Athol. But overall, I like the balance of that. It's not an Oloroso monster by any stretch of the imagination. There is complexity, there's progression. So again, I think that's another really good bottle. Okay, now let's move on to showing one stuff. Sorry. Now let's move on to the Aberlour. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? It's actually quite reserved. You kind of have to work this nose. It really doesn't want to give up a great deal. It's kind of, but then it is almost 60%, so it's kind of understandable, I suppose. big sherry. I mean, you know, no, this is a sherry monster. Dark chocolate, raisinated fruits, toasty oak, more raisins, spice. I mean, it is. If you love the Abunda, you're gonna wet yourself over this. It has to be said. There's no Aberlour character there whatsoever. There's no American oak. No nothing. It's sherry. It's sherry, and now, not my cup of tea, as you well know. But again, there is a commercial aspect here, and the thing is, I suppose there is enough complexity here within the sort of the sherry characters to make it interesting. It's not totally one-dimensional. I'd quite happily sell this to a sherry head. Let's do the pass one. That's a dry finish. Now, the alcohol really is. Fruit crumble springs to mind. I mean, bear with me. I mean, we're talking sort of black fruits, dark raisins, maybe a little, almost kind of tapenade, I guess, but pastry as well. It's kind of crumbly pastry. It is kind of, like I said, it's fruit crumble, sherry fruit crumble. There's some chocolate, there's a little bit of coffee, there's tannins, it's drying, it's intense, it's sherried. I mean, it's kind of, you know, what do you expect? I mean, at the end of the day, it's spent almost 2 years finishing in first fill sherry, out of what 11 years, so, you know, 9 years it's spent in an American oak cask, a couple of years in sherry, and you know, it just goes to show you how intense first fill sherry casks are. I mean, if that had spent its entire life in a sherry cask like the Abunda, I mean, you know, you'd be pulling splinters out of your mouth, I can tell you that for a start. Anyway, let's put a little drop of water with it and see what happens. Softer, chocolatier, chocolatier, is that a real word? More chocolate character, shall we say. It's still sherry. You know, it is what it is at the end of the day. I'm not going to sort of, like, you know, sugarcoat it. It is an unmitigated sherry monster. Let's see what passes on. A little bit softer, but still quite drying on the finish. I mean, there's no getting away from that. That tannin is now really drying out the finish. Although there's a nice weight of raisinated fruit. I mean, okay, you know, it was never going to be my favourite whiskey of the afternoon. You kind of guys know that by now. But I think it has some interest for I was about to say characters there that like sherry, for customers that like sherry. There's enough complexity, it's interesting. It's Aberlour at the end of the day, you know. It's kind of, I wouldn't say it's an easy sell, but it's kind of like, you know, people already have this opinion of Aberlour being a big sherry monster, and well, it isn't really, you know. The sort of like the double cask is actually, again, really nicely balanced, and I would argue one of the nicest and one of the most well balanced whiskies to use, both American oak and sherry. Yeah, along with maybe the Dalmore 12, possibly, you know, again. But it's the Abunda that gets everybody's, you know, going, and this is just a dead ringer for that at the end of the day. So, you know, yeah, it is what it is, as they say. Okay, so moving on to the last whiskey of the afternoon. This is the Miltonduff 16. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Okay, it's got a little bit of maturity. It's got that kind of cognac-y kind of baked fruit. It's quite vibrant. It's quite citric. There's plenty of sherry, apricot, herbal oloroso, not a great deal of distillery character. I mean, the thing is with Miltonduff has this kind of herbally kind of character anyway, and when you stick it in sherry, it kind of sort of gets lost a little bit. You know, you get the herbal Oloroso, but is it the Oloroso or is it the distillery character? It's kind of chicken and egg, I suppose, sort of, to a certain extent. It's okay. There's a little bit of lanolin, a little bit of dried fruit. I'm kind of, it's all right, but I know how much I would have to pop this on the shelf at. The RRP for this is over 90 quid, and I'm not quite comfortable with trying to sell this for 90 quid. Yeah, it's okay, it's pleasant enough, but you know, if I had to sell something for 90 quid, it really would have to be worth 90 quid. It would have to be, oh, not the dog's doodahs, but it would have to have an awful lot of interest, and I don't really think this is complex enough, and it's basically 90 odd quid because it's 16 years old. See what the pass like. It's light, it's fresh, it's vibrant, there's juicy dried fruits, there's a herbalness going on, which could be distillery character, could be Oloroso, a little bit of white chocolate, some biscuits, dried fruit, autumnal fruit, nice length, bit of spice. Again, it's a pleasant whiskey, but I just keep asking myself, is it £90 worth of whiskey? And I have to say, no, it isn't. If this was 70 quid, yeah, I could kind of go with that, but 90 quid, I just want a little bit more. I'm being bloody picky here, it has to be said, you know, and I understand why it's 90 quid, because it's 16 years old, but just sometimes when you kind of think, you know, it's a you know, question of sort of like, why is this 90 quid? Sometimes it's 90 quid because the complexity is off the charts. Other times it's because it's a 16-year-old spirit. And in this instance, and I'm not denigrating the quality of what it is a good quality spirit, but it's just not worth 90 quid in my personal opinion. You know, and that's, and the thing, and like I said, you know, if I'm putting my kind of selling hat on, I've got to be completely comfortable with sort of selling a premium priced whiskey. You know, somebody sort of said, you know, I've got a budget of 80 to 100 quid, you know, this is not a whiskey I'm going to sort of like reach for. There are other whiskies that I've got that I would reach for. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us on with a little drop of water. It's still quite waxy. Well, it's still quite waxy. It's quite waxy. It's got sort of a vibrancy still. It's got a distinct cognac-y kind of rancio. It's got some maturity. Arguably, it's more interesting now. I'll put a little drop of water with it. That has to be said. Let's see what pass on. Again, quite mellow. Again, quite cognac-y. Dried fruits, dried apple. Slightly longer, maybe not so much of that Oloroso intensity, more of that kind of baked fruit, baked apple. Good, it's got a good length. I mean, I think I prefer that with water, it has to be said. I think it's just brought out a little bit more character of the spirit. Well, no, it hasn't really. It's just kind of softened it. Again, I'm not getting a huge amount of Miltonduff. I mean, it's very, probably tastes a lot older than 16, has to be said. So yes, you could sort of, as a selling point, you probably you could sell it like that. You could basically say this actually tastes more like a 20-odd-year-old, and in reality it probably does, but it just doesn't kind of, yeah, it doesn't sort of, yeah, you know what I'm getting. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, big thank you to Hugh from James Eadie for the samples for today's episode of the show, and the continued continued support. I mean, year in year, you know, 4 times a year I get, you know, a box of samples from James Eadie, and you know, it's just really very, very much appreciated. Sometimes I buy some stuff, sometimes I don't, you know. It's symbiotic at the end of the day, as they say. And you know, like I said, I don't take these kind of things for granted at all. Anyway, the Ben Nevis, yeah, I kind of like that. There was enough distillery character. It was subtly sherry influenced, quite space-sidey, green fruits, lots of that kind of stuff, bit of breadiness. So it kind of ticked my boxes. You know, it's kind of $49.95. Yeah, I'm happy to sell you that whiskey. The Aultmore, again, I quite liked it. It had sort of, you could argue, a bit of Aultmore-y kind of character to a certain extent, but there was this kind of biscuitiness, this sort of pseudo Madeira kind of Finnish character going on. It was interesting. It was slightly different. Again, you know, sub 50 quid. Just yeah, I can kind of go with that. The Tamnavulin I really liked. You know, it was subtle on the sherry. You know, 8 months, just the right amount of time, finishing in the Malaga casks, and not an overt sherry monster. There was distillery character coming through there. So you know, I think sort of technical perspective, quite happy with that. Really nicely balanced. Blair Athol, again, I thought was actually quite pleasantly balanced. Less distillery character, more of the sort of inference of the sort of weight of kind of Blair Athol. A little bit more sherry character, but not to the detriment, I think, of the overall complexity. So yeah, really happy with that. The Aberlour, yeah, well, it is what it is at the end of the day, you know. You look at the colour of it and you think, yeah, that's almost 2 years in a sherry butt. First fill, Oloroso sherry butt, I hasten to add. Yeah, you're going to get any distillery character? No, not whatsoever. But it had some pleasant complexity within the confines of the sherry character. And the Miltonduff, I think I said plenty about the Miltonduff, and I think maybe I was a bit harsh on that, I don't know. It's a pleasant whiskey, but it's too expensive for me personally at the end of the day. But you know, that's, like I said, it's kind of like I'm a bit picky when it comes to that kind of thing. I've got to be sort of fully comfortable with, you know, wanting to sort of sell a whiskey, doesn't matter what whiskey it is, at that kind of price. And you know, there are whiskies that, you know, my employer stocks that I'm less than enthusiastic about, and if people want to buy it, you know, it's like I had a couple come in the shop not so long ago, and they said they had X kind of budget, and I was saying, yeah, you can go for this or this, these are really intriguing, and they bought a Glenfarclas 10-year-old. Nothing wrong with a Glenfarclas 10-year-old, but it's not exactly exciting, to say the least. And I was trying to tell them that. I was saying, yeah, all right, it's kind of an okay whiskey, but it's not exciting. You know, these whiskies are, but yeah. Anyway, sometimes a sale is a sale, as they say. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I think there's some really intriguing and interesting whiskies that have been released by James Eadie in this quarter. So not a great deal else to say apart from good afternoon and good dramming.